We have with us a prominent member of Chennai's legal society. Hello, ma'am. It's a pleasure. What do you think are your views on the Dhoti case, and do you think the club's bylaws should they supersede the bill that has been currently passed?
I, I think it's a storm over a teacup in a way. I think, of course, definitely the rules of the clubs are very antiquated and obsolete and, colonial. But then, one has to just laugh off at this situation. It's like when you become a member, you adhere to the rules, right? Much as I find that these rules are very silly. And so the one way of actually not adhering to it is by not going there at all. Now, having said that, I think a club, to my mind, would be within its policy to formulate the rules that they want, as long as they don't hurt any individual. And if necessary, the rules can only be changed by the members of the club, in their own way, in their own way of managing their affairs. Now, to actually formulate a rule which say that the clubs shall not discriminate on the basis of a dress code, I think is fraught with certain difficulties. Today the dress code is very absurd in this given case. But supposing, the clubs do have restrictions on footwear, they do have restrictions on Bermudas, they do have restriction on shorts. So how do you decide what is a national dress? How do you decide what is a decent dress, and how do you decide what should be permitted and not be permitted at all? Secondly, I think once you allow the state to make an inroad into the dress, you can then allow the state to make an inroad into other areas also. For example, the government can then pass a law and say all these clubs can have only so and so as members, must give membership to others, must not give membership to someone else. So however absurd and silly a rule may be, I think for the government to make a change and impose that rule on all kinds of clubs makes it a very, kind of makes it an interference in their right to carry on and manage their affairs. Let's take, for example, clubs which are being controlled by the army, where they have a very strict regimentation on how one should dress and come. It's like if you then say, and then you penalize them and say that a person who prevents somebody from entering a club because of a particular dress they have not worn as per their rules, and say that they must be sentenced to 6 months is extraordinarily harsh, and it's absurd.
Right. Do you think it imposes on our constitutional freedom, the freedom to express ourselves, the freedom to dress ourselves as we wish?
Yeah, but then that is also subject to reasonable restrictions. See, this whole area of freedom to dress the way you want is seen as a freedom of expression internationally. It has not developed very well in the Indian context, but there are, you take there's this huge debate about the scarf and about the veil in Europe, in Turkey, which has held that some kind of restrictions can be imposed by the state. The latest judgment of the European Union on the veil, with reference to Muslim women, and France's rule that you shall not have any kind of religious symbols on your person, have all been upheld. So I think the freedom to dress the way you want is also subject to some kind of reasonable restriction. Any of these freedoms are. So for example, an educational institution can impose its own rule on what students should wear. A company can impose its own rule on what the factory workers can wear. And you can't then say you have a right to do what you want, because your freedom is anyway there. See, in a case of dress, you can wear whatever you want, but at certain places you don't wear it the way you want. So I don't see the restriction as being too difficult.
As a last question, do you think this stance by the government is an emotional one, given?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go on, please. I want to know if it gives the government leeway to impose more of the local culture, the regional culture, by way of passing bills or passing laws, rather than taking a proper feasibility or what do you say, the impact of what it would have on a club's laws or any regional laws that it might supersede? Do you think it's an
I
emotional
think so.
one?
See, let me put it this way. See, culture is so hard to determine.
It is.
And cultures of the most, there are subcultures all around us, and culture is often the last resort for politicians to make a huge issue about
Absolutely.
it. Okay, there's no uniformity in the way in which people practice their own culture. There is, of course, I mean, culture is, there can be finer aspects to culture such as your literature, poetry, etc.
Correct.
But when culture is seen as an imposition of one set of values as against the other, who is perceived as an outsider, it's hugely problematic, and hugely problematic when the state chooses to impose culture in that particular form. Now, how do you define culture? For example, schools in Tamil Nadu insist that teachers wear saris. Why not a salwar? That's also, it's an acceptable Indian dress. So there is a subtle imposition of, I'm talking about government schools.
Correct.
So there is a certain imposition of a particular cultural value,
Correct.
which the state thinks is the best.
Correct.
I think the state should scrupulously keep itself away from the idea and from the debate on issues of culture.
Correct.
Because cultures are anyway fluid, and what is today can change tomorrow. It may be part of your culture to wear, you may consider it your culture to dress the way you want, or it may be your culture to wear trousers. It may come from that background. So why should that be taken away from you?
Correct. Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am. That's wonderful.